Hey runners, just another running coach here. We've officially made it out of winter into spring, and I'm back with another vlog type post. It's been a while. The last one was right after the New York City Marathon, and this one is coming just before I finally run, and I finally get to say this, my first Boston Marathon. I can't even begin to describe how excited I am. I don't want to overhype anything, but in a way, it does feel like a culmination of over 10 years of running for me since I trained for my first marathon back in 2012. So I'm going to talk about that, going to talk about my goals, and I'm going to recap a couple of my recent races, including the also much anticipated New York City Half. If you're new to this YouTube channel, I don't make these vlog type videos too often because my main focus is coaching and helping runners reach their goals. Speaking of which, I want to throw a quick shout out to Greg, who just ran his first marathon at the LA Marathon. Amazing job. He trained up to it in 8 weeks. And I do want to quickly plug my coaching business by saying that slots are open for the summer and fall marathon season. If you're interested in a custom training plan, in-person sessions, or you just want to say hi, you can find my website and contact info at the end of the video. So picking up where we left off, right after the New York City Marathon, I was pretty happy with how that race went, but one major takeaway was that I still had a bit of catching up to do to get back to my very best. I was aiming to PR, got a little carried away with my stretch goal of breaking 250, and I ended up running a 3:03. Don't get me wrong, still a great time I'm very proud of, but there was definitely work to be done. And after a few weeks of recovering and taking some much needed time off, I got right back into it because after running my first Boston qualifying time almost 5 years ago, but always missing the additional cutoff when too many people qualify, I finally got accepted into Boston. Now, if you're not familiar with how it works, to get into Boston, you have to run a qualifying time, but that doesn't necessarily guarantee your spot. They only have a limited number of spots, so there has to be some additional cutoff somewhere. And in 2017, 2018, and 2019, I didn't make that additional cutoff. In fact, a couple of times I missed it by literally just seconds. So, especially after a somewhat disappointing time at New York City Marathon, I was very motivated to get that news that I was finally going to get to run Boston. So I started training again, working harder than ever, and I can now say I have a newfound respect for all of my friends who've trained for spring marathons because doing long runs in this winter weather was rough. Now, under normal circumstances, I would have spent my entire winter focusing solely on Boston, but as I've mentioned in the past, my favorite distance to race is actually the half marathon. And my favorite half marathon, the New York City Half, was finally making a comeback after 2 years of being canceled due to the pandemic. By March, it would be over 2 years since I ran my half marathon PR, and since I had no idea when I'd be running another half, the temptation to train for that was very strong as well. So, after a lot of careful consideration and brainstorming different approaches to chase both goals a month apart from each other, I decided to create a hybrid training plan that had half marathon focused workouts in the middle of the week and marathon focused long runs on the weekends. I maintained about 40 miles per week for around 16 weeks. My longest run of the plan was 17 miles, and I progressed my training paces every 4 to 6 weeks, starting a step slower than goal pace for the first part of the plan, right on pace for the middle, and a step faster than goal pace for the last stretch of the plan. Doing this sort of plan definitely came with some risks. The most obvious one is only doing 17 miles as my longest run. But I did do a lot of medium long runs in the middle of the week, so there were a lot of long efforts in total. By the way, my plan was heavily influenced by Jack Daniels' running formula book, The Running Coach, not the whiskey. If you're not familiar with Daniels, I can't recommend him enough. And if you're curious to see what my overall plan or what my workouts looked like, it's all up there on Strava for you to check out. So, was this hybrid training plan worth the risk? Well, I still have a marathon to run, But the good news is that we can at least answer part of that question. First, let's rewind to February when I ran my first race of 2022. An old favorite of mine, the Al Gordon 4 Mile in Prospect Park. I've always loved doing this race as a tune-up before the New York City Half, and it was actually the last race that I ran on my own pre-pandemic. So it was pretty cool to come back here and put my training to the test, since at this point I was 2 months into my training plan. I didn't really go in with huge expectations since it has been a really long time since I ran a short race like this, but I was hoping to at least come close to my fastest time so I could build some confidence and feel like I was in just as good shape as I was before the world shut down. And funny enough, I finished in 22:12, the exact same time I ran back in 2020, which was also my PR. So basically, this was exactly the kind of sign I was hoping for. My training was definitely paying off, at least in terms of my speed. Now the question was whether or not that speed would hold up throughout a significantly longer race. And before I even knew it, March was here. I was lining up at the start of the New York City Half. The weather was perfect, and I was feeling really, really good. I remember 2 years ago, just before the race was canceled, thinking that I was in store for a really strong race. So in a way, it kind of felt like I had unfinished business here, and that definitely provided that extra bit of motivation that I needed. The time to beat was 1:17:08, a 5:53 per mile pace. But going out of the gate, I wanted to be really careful not to go out too fast and not get overly ambitious the way I did at the marathon. So I gave myself a pretty conservative start, reaching mile 1 in 6:15. And almost right after that, I could tell it was just one of those days where the stars were in perfect alignment. It was also really awesome having a lot of friends out on the course as spectators and volunteers. And to make a long story short, I set almost a full minute PR, finishing in 1:16:09. Given that a lot happened between now and 2020, including actually getting mild COVID back in January, having surgery, going through IT band syndrome, I was just over the moon. And I gotta congratulate my brother and my friends who also finished that day, Josh, Greg, Matt, just way too many of you guys to congratulate and name, but you know who you are. And a special thanks to my girlfriend, Dan, who volunteered, and the rest of my cheer squad for waking up early and giving me that extra boost of energy toward the finish line. So the training plan has worked out so far, but the main event has yet to come, the Boston Marathon. Just taking a step back for a moment, I want to say that honestly, I never imagined I would even get to this point. Other than elementary school track, where I was eventually put on the race walking event, I never had any ambitions to run, let alone run marathons, until it became about fighting Crohn's disease. And when I was training for my first marathon, there was literally no thought given to time. I just wanted to finish, send a message that kids with Crohn's disease could do difficult things too. And even though my first time, 3:49, was still really good for a lot of people, breaking 3 hours, qualifying for Boston, and dreaming of running even faster times seems completely unreachable. Not just at first, but for years after that, even as I continued to get faster. So nowadays, I feel like as a runner and a coach, part of my mission is to give people the impression that it is possible to keep improving, and you don't have to be insanely gifted to dream about getting into the Boston Marathon. My progress was in very small steps across a long period of time. Didn't happen overnight or on my second, third, fourth, fifth, or sixth marathon. So having said that, I'm extremely excited, and to an extent, I'm at peace with whatever happens in Boston on Monday. No matter what the finishing time is, it's going to be a memorable time and a privilege. All right, enough sappy rambling. Let's jump into my goals for the 2022 Boston Marathon. My current marathon PR is 2:54:08, which is a 6:39 mile average pace, and that was set at the 2019 New York City Marathon. The last marathon I ran was also New York back in November, and I finished that in 3:03:34. My primary goal in that race was to PR, and my stretch goal, as I mentioned earlier, was to break 250, neither of which I ended up achieving. However, things are very different this time around, and in hindsight, I think I overestimated what kind of shape I was in going into that race. Don't get me wrong, that was a really good training block, got me through my IT band issue. It still resulted in a really good time, and in a way, it set me up perfectly for this training block, which has allowed me to elevate my level to where it is now. So with that in mind, my primary goal for this race is going to be to break 250. This is it. I'm throwing down the gauntlet. I really truly believe that with a good pacing strategy and decent weather, I've got the fitness to do it. It's ultimately going to come down to my ability to handle a new course that I've never run before and everything involved in traveling for a marathon, which I've also never done before. Therefore, the doable goal will be to set a PR. Nothing's ever guaranteed, but given that I just ran a 1:16 half and Boston's an easier course than New York, I do think that, barring a total disaster, this should be well within reach. And last but not least, you might be wondering, what could possibly be my stretch goal? Is it going to be 245? Is it going to be 240? Well, my friends, I'm going to learn from my past mistakes and say that because this is a new race and altogether new experience for me, I will not be setting a stretch goal. As it is, I will be incredibly satisfied with 250 if I can achieve it. I do think that with perfect conditions, perfect pacing, and everything else falling in my favor, I can probably run a few minutes faster, but I'm not even going to allow that thought to enter my mind. I'm not going to allow myself to make the same mistake I did back in November, where I allowed my stretch goal to distract me and ultimately sabotage my effort to achieve my primary goal. First, I want to break 250, and only then can I allow myself to start thinking about what's next. So there you have it, my recap for the beginning of 2022 and my pre-race thoughts going into the Boston Marathon. Wish me luck. Let me know if you're running as well. And if you have any tips, this is where I could use them. Course strategy, travel tips, anything to just get the most out of my Boston experience, please send them my way. And as always, if you're interested in coaching or custom training plans or just want some friendly advice, always feel free to reach out. Until next time, happy running.